All right, so we've got a new release from High and Wicked. This is singular, limited release, number 10, RoseTattoo. If you've not heard the Dropkick Murphys song, A Rose Tattoo, that is exactly where this name comes from. This is actually the successor to one of our previous releases, which was The Wild Rover, also named after a classic Irish drinking song. The Wild Rover was named Best Cask Strength Irish Whiskey 2 years in a row, received a multitude of features from everything from Imbibe magazine to Maxim and Forbes and Rob Report. It was, needless to say, truly a singular limited release. This one is absolutely the same. Whereas the Wild Rover was finished for a period of time in ex-PX sherry casks, here RoseTattoo has been finished in ex-Amarone casks. So we're looking for that kind of sweet, lightly, somewhat dry red wine characteristic from these Italian Amarone casks. This particular selection was finished and blended by Mr. Noel Sweeney, who is to date the most awarded distiller and blender across all categories of whiskey. He was inducted to the UK's Whiskey Hall of Fame in 2017 and wrote some of the technical specifications for the entire denomination of origin for Irish whiskey. Arguably, one of the absolute masters of his craft in Irish whiskey. This is truly a unique offering. It is not a subtle Irish whiskey. This is a big, intense, full-flavored, single malt Irish. Everyone thinks of single malt Scotch. We occasionally hear single malt Irish. This particular release is big and intense. It is double cask matured, meaning that it started first in ex-bourbon barrels and then found its way into these ex-Amarone casks. I'm not going to declare the age statement, but because that was the ethos that Noel passed along, and so I'm going to abide by that. Let's get into it. On the nose, there's beautiful malt characteristics. I don't know if I would initially identify this as Irish because my thoughts immediately go to Scotch when I get that kind of aroma of malted barley. It is sweet, it is bright, it is a little bit softer than I would expect for like a single malt Scotch, but there is still that big kind of unctuous, malty character to it. On the palate, there's also a really nice kind of almost citrusy Granny Smith apple note. So there's apples and pears, but cooked apples and pears. On the palate, being as that this is a cask strength, which is about 120 some proof, it is quite stout. But man, it is rich, it is sweet, it is unctuous, it is dessert in a glass. This thing is layered, deeply complex, really nice still like bright malt characteristics, which I would take more into the world of if you've ever had sugar smacks, that kind of cereal. I think the Amarone is lending just like really nice kind of a weight and mouthfeel and tannic structure. I would say that it's almost like if you've had baked apple pie, but where the apples have still kept some of the skin on, that adds an extra layer of almost not bitterness, but a little bit of a tannic characteristic. I keep coming back to desserts, I keep coming back to apple pie, I keep coming back to caramelization and really nice biscuity brioche character, good buttery essence to it. So there is a nice, bright, citrusy floral note. I would liken it to more like a citrus honey. There's this honey characteristic, but also a bright lemon zest note. Lemon zest leaning into orange. I make something called sunshine juice, which is orange juice with a bit of lemon juice to punctuate the acidity. And it reminds me a lot of that. There is a hint of a smoky characteristic to it. It's not peated or smoked barley. It's not really intense, but it is like a toasty barley note, like chocolate malts. And you start getting those roasty, toasty characteristics in the malt itself. That's a lot of what I'm getting on the nose. Really beautiful, really full flavored in general. Now, this is singular limited release number 10. That means we've had 10 of these limited releases. The main reason we are in Ireland is because we have the opportunity to work with Noel Sweeney. Noel is a master and artisan of his craft. We're thrilled to be working with him. And RoseTattoo was also named Best Cask Strength Irish Whiskey this year. So there you have it. RoseTattoo, the latest singular limited release from High and Wicked, celebrating double matured cask strength single malt Irish whiskey. I thought it'd be interesting to do a little glass comparison. So I pulled a few different glasses here. The classic Glencairn in the middle. This is a glass that was specifically designed for Irish whiskey, and the name of it fails me, but I thought it would be interesting because I only use it on occasion. Just a quick comparison between these three glasses. And one of my favorite whiskey tasting glasses, formerly known as the Ben Ewan, now the Fontaine glass. It is a very light crystal glass, but the stem, the character of the bulb, the flaring around the edge make it a beautiful spirits tasting glass. I often liken it to the first time you put on a proper prescription for your glasses. You can just see more depth. Let's do a quick nose comparison while we do some side-by-sides. So on the nose, immediately much softer, more layers. It's almost like this palette this is very punctuated, very punchy. This is much more subtle. The Fontaine glass immediately layers out. And I would say if this is high saturation of color, this is much more desaturated and spread out. It's almost like it took the entire character of this nose and stretched it so that now it's like you can almost smell it at different layers in the glass and isolate different components. So very punchy. I get a lot of the sweetness. I get a lot of the fruit notes. And here in the Fontaine, once we actually let it rinse too. Yeah, the Fontaine, I get a lot softer high end on the nose. More of like apricots and peaches. And then I get into the honey characteristics. And then down at the base is where I get some of those like heavier, bigger notes that I get immediately punching in the Glencairn. Now, in the Irish whiskey tasting glass, it kills me that I can't remember the name. If I can look it up, I'll put it in the description or in the comment. This glass is almost too light. So what's interesting is the flare, the bulb here of the glass, how it flares out. It's almost effervescing and aerating too much. So whereas this is extremely focused, very punchy nose, this one is the next layer of it where it opens up and reveals itself while still retaining some of that punchiness. This one is just a bit too wide at the top and I'm getting way too much aeration going on. So I feel like this is almost like a Goldilocks situation, right? Like too hot, too cold, just right. Now, this isn't an inexpensive glass. It's hand-blown crystal. It's a thinner glass too. If you are serious about spirits tasting, this is my go-to glass when I'm writing critical tasting notes. Now, just curious, how does this affect the palate? Because thickness of the glass will affect the way that the liquid enters your palate, which does affect the way that you experience it. Some people are just like, whatever, man, just drink your whiskey. If that's how you feel about it, then great. I'm not here to yuck your yum. At the end of the day, drink what you like. Use whatever glass you like. I always tell people, if you want to get into spirits tasting seriously, just make sure you're using the same glassware regularly when you're training your palate. Because if you train entirely on the Glen and then somebody gives you an old-fashioned glass to taste the same thing, it's going to taste completely different. If you are critically analyzing, just make sure you're utilizing the same glass with all of your critical analyses. Let's go into the palate because I know that will also be different. On the Glencairn, quick, immediate entry. There's a pop of ethanol to the back. I get all the sweetness, all the acidity that's in here, which is really nice, like Granny Smith apple and pear, other things going on. So I'm going to go to the Irish whiskey glass next because it was so thin on the nose. I'm curious what it's going to do on the palate. It's a slightly lighter weight of glass. It's not as light as the crystal there. Okay, so on the Irish whiskey glass. Now that flare is nice. What the flare does is I'll pour from the Glencairn first. We'll watch it as it falls off the lip. As it falls over the lip of the glass, you see how it curls back onto the actual glass and falls down, which is pretty normal. But here that flare allows it to flow beautifully out. The palate experience on this is really gorgeous. Yeah. I still get the little punctuation, but it does flow much more so across the palate. It more evenly coats the palate. With the Glencairn, if I am sipping with the Glencairn regularly, I do find I want to coat the palate with the spirit, which is a bit of the whole, like, you move the liquid around your palate so that you then get the remains. On the Fontaine Ewan, first biggest difference, obviously with the stem here and having a full stem, I'm not adding heat, right? So I'm not adding the body heat into this, which does also affect the way that you're going to taste a spirit, right? If one of these is warmed and one of these is cooler, that's also going to affect the way that the different molecules aromatize. And obviously, if I'm tasting a warm whiskey versus a cold whiskey, I'm going to experience that difference, which will affect the context. Very kind of soft entry, really does just flow out of the glass really nicely. There is still a little drip there, so it does roll over the side, but this is a very thin crystal. The thinner crystal, in my opinion, also just really heightens your sensitivity to when that liquid hits your palate. Right here, I've got a bit of weight that's hitting my palate, whereas this is soft, it's delicate. I feel the softness and the delicate nature, and so I attenuate to that. I am absolutely trying to be hypercritical Another of my favorite glasses, which I actually use more for rum, is the Glencairn Copita. When I am going through a ton of samples, I use this glass because I like the way it punctuates the nose and I can assess character really quickly. For agave spirits, I really like using these Chisholm Trail Jarritos glasses. I find that the overall shape of this glass aromatizes agave really well. Depending on if I'm tasting a higher proof agave spirit or a lower proof agave spirit, it is going to affect which of the two glasses I go for. More often than not, I am using the high proof, which has a little bit wider of a flare at the lip, but has a slightly larger diameter opening, which allows a bit more aeration. This is important with that higher proof, so you don't just get a big blast of alcohol numbing out your olfactory and sensory. Lots of different glasses. I'm surprised by the Irish whiskey glass in this setting and tasting side by side. I really like the unique palate entry. I get that same palate entry experience from the Fontaine, and I get, in my opinion, a much more well-defined nose here. If you want a hyper-focused nose, that is where these Glencairn Copita glasses work best, which is when I'm doing a large set of tastings and trying to make large decisions quickly. I also really like this for rum because it presents all of these big rummy characteristics and more of the brandy-esque characteristics of rum really well. It just depends. Different glasses, different spirits, all of the above, but at the end of the day, just drink what you like, put it in a vessel, and don't let somebody shame you if you're using the wrong glass. That's dumb. I am purposefully splitting hairs in this video to say it for the umpteenth time. So there you have it. Way too deep dive, nerdy stuff, all about glassware. Cheers.